Welcome to Horror Looms, where real horror meets true mystery. If you love eerie stories that stay with you long after they're told, you're in the right place. I'm on a journey to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps me keep these dark tales coming. So hit subscribe and join the darkness. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's real. It's deeply intriguing. And it's time to face it.
My best friend died a week after my 12th birthday. His death wasn't anyone's fault. Eli was an avid swimmer. He may have looked scrawny at first glance, but put that kid in a body of water and he'd be outmaneuvering people twice his age, swimming vicious laps around stunned high school seniors like a barracuda. All the other kids who spent time in the lake were just tourists, foreigners who had a superficial understanding of the space. For Eli, it was different. He was a native, seemingly born and bred amongst the wildlife that also called the water their home. It was his element, which is why his parents were comfortable with him going to the lake alone. It was cloudy that day. Maybe an overcast concealed the jagged rock under the surface where Eli dove in. Or maybe he was just too comfortable with the lake for his own good and wasn't paying enough attention. In the end, the mechanics of his death don't matter, but I found myself dwelling on them over the last 8 years, all the same. Probably because they're a mystery, a well-kept secret between Eli and his second home. I like to imagine that he experienced no pain. If there was no pain, then his transition into the next life must have been seamless, I figured. One moment, he was feeling the cold rush of the water cocooning around his body as he submerged, and then, before his nerves could even register the skull fracture, he was gone. Gone to whatever that next cosmic step truly is, whether it's heaven, oblivion, or some other afterlife in between those two opposites. That's what I believed when I was growing up, at least. It helped me sleep at night, a comforting lie to quiet a grieving heart. Now though, I'm burdened with the truth. He didn't go anywhere. For the last 8 years, he's been closer than I could have ever imagined. My great-grandfather lived a long, storied life. Grew up outside of Mexico City in the wake of the revolution. Born the same year that Diaz was overthrown, actually. Immigrated to southern Texas in the 40s. Fought in World War II. Well, fought may be a strong word for his role in toppling the Nazi regime. Antonio's official title? Pigeoneer. For those of you who were unaware, carrier pigeons played a critical role in wartime communications well into the first half of the 20th century. The Allies had at least 250,000 bred for that sole purpose. Renowned for their speed and accuracy in delivering messages over enemy-held territory where radios failed, pigeons were there to pick up the slack. And like any military battalion, they needed a trainer and a handler. That's where Antonio came in. It sounds absurd nowadays, but I promise it's all true. It wasn't something he just did on the side either. It was his exclusive function on the front line. When a batch of pigeons were shipped to his post, he'd evaluate them, separate the strong from the weak. The strong were stationed in a pigeon loft, which, to my understanding, was basically a fancy name for a coop that could send and receive messengers. The job fit him perfectly. Antonio's passion was ornithology. He grew up training seabirds to be messengers under the tutelage of his father, and he abhorred violence on principle. From his perspective, if he had to be drafted, there wasn't better outcome. That said, the front line was dangerous even if you weren't an active combatant. One spring morning, German planes rained the breath of hell over Antonio and his compatriots. He avoided being caught in the actual explosive radius of any particular bomb, but a ricocheting fragment of hot metal still found its way to the center of his chest. The shrapnel, thankfully, was blunt. It fractured his sternum without piercing his chest wall. Even so, the propulsive energy translated through the bone and collided into his heart, silencing the muscle in an instant. Commotio cordis, medical jargon for a heart stopping from the sheer force of a blunt injury. The only treatment is defibrillation, a shock to restart its rhythm. No one knew that back then though. Even if they did, a portable version of the device wasn't invented until nearly 15 years after the war ended. On paper, I shouldn't exist. Neither should my grandmother, or her brother, or my mother, all of whom were born when Antonio returned from the front line. That spring morning, my great-grandfather should have died. But he didn't. The way his soldier buddies told it, they found him on the ground without a pulse, breathless, face waxy and drained of color, dead as doornail. After about 20 minutes of cardiac arrest, however, he just got back up, completely without ceremony. No big gasp to refill his starved lungs, no one pushing on his chest and pleading for his return, no immaculately timed electrocution from a downed power line to reinstitute his heartbeat. Simply put, Antonio decided not to die, scared his buddies half to death with his resurrection, apparently. 2 of his comrades watched the whole thing unfold in stunned silence. Antonio opened his eyes, stood up, and kept on living like he hadn't been a corpse a minute prior. Just started running around their camp, asking if the injured needed any assistance. Nearly stopped their hearts in turn. He didn't even realize he had died. My great-grandfather came back tainted, though. His conscious mind didn't recognize it at first, but it was always there. You see, as I understand it, some small part of Antonio remained where the dead go, and the most of him that did return had been exposed to the black ether of the hereafter. He was irreversibly changed by it. Learned things he couldn't explain with human words, saw things his eyes weren't designed to understand. That one in a billion fluke of nature put him in a precarious position. When he came back to life, Antonio had 1 foot on the ground and the other foot in the grave, so to speak. Death seems to linger around my family. Not dramatically, mind you. No final destination bullshit. I'm talking cancer, drunk driving accidents, heart attacks, relatively typical ends. But it's all so much more frequent in my bloodline, and that seems to have started once Antonio got back from the war. His fractured soul attracted death. It hovered over him like a carrion bird above roadkill. But, for whatever reason, it never took him specifically, settling for someone close by instead. So, once my dad passed from a stroke when I was 6, there were only 3 of us left. Me, my mother, and Antonio. An hour after Eli's body had been dredged from the lake, I heard an explosive series of knocks at our front door, a bevy of knuckles rapping against the wood like machine gun fire. At that point, he had been missing for a little over 24 hours, and that's all I knew. I stood in the hallway, a few feet from the door, rendered motionless by the noise. Implicitly, I knew not to answer, subconsciously aware that I wasn't ready for the grim reality on the other side. The concept of Eli being hurt or in trouble was something I could grasp. But him being dead? That felt impossible, fantastical, like witchcraft or Bigfoot. The old died and the young lived. That was the natural order. Bending those rules was something an adult could do to make a campfire story extra scary, but nothing more. And yet, I couldn't answer the knocking. All I could do was stare at the dark oak of the door and bite my lip as Antonio and my mother hurried by me. My great-grandfather unlatched the lock and pulled it open. The music of death swept through our home, followed by Eli's parents shortly after. Sounds of anger, sorrow, and disbelief, the holy trinity of despair, wails that wavered my faith in God. Mom guided me upstairs while Antonio went to go speak with them in our kitchen. They were pleading with him, but I couldn't comprehend what they were pleading for. It's important to mention that Antonio's involuntary connection with the afterlife was a poorly kept secret in my hometown. I don't know how that came to be. It wasn't talked about in polite conversation. Despite that, everyone knew the deal. As long as you were insistent enough, my great-grandfather would agree to commune with the dead on your behalf, send and receive simple messages through the veil. Not entirely unlike his trained pigeons, he didn't enjoy doing it, but I think he felt a certain obligation to provide the service on account of his resurrection. He must have sent back for a reason, right? Even at 12, I sort of understood what he could do, not in the same way that townsfolk did. To them, Antonio was a last resort, a workaround to the finality of death. I'm sure they believed he had control of the connection and that he wasn't putting himself at risk when he exercised that control. They needed to believe that, so they didn't feel guilty for asking. I, unfortunately, knew better. Antonio lived with us since I was born. Although my mother tried to prevent it, I was subjected to his episodes many times throughout the years. About an hour later, I fell asleep in my mom's arms, out of tears and exhausted from the mental growing pains. As I was drifting off, I could still hear the muffled sounds of Eli's parents talking to Antonio downstairs. The walls were thin, but not thin enough for me to hear their words. When I woke up the following morning, two things had changed. First, Antonio's extensive collection of birdhouses had moved. Under normal circumstances, his current favorite would be hung from the largest blue spruce in our backyard, with the remaining 20 stored in the garage, where our car used to be before we sold it. Now, they were all in the backyard. In the dead of night, Antonio had erected a sprawling aerial metropolis. Boxes with varying colorations, entrance holes, and rooftops hung at different elevations among the trees, roughly in the shape of a circle a few yards from the kitchen window. Despite that, I didn't see an uptick in the number of birds flying about our backyard. Quite the opposite. Honestly, I can't recall ever seeing a bird in our backyard again after that. Whatever was transpiring in that enclosed space, the birds wanted no part of it. But between the spruce's densely packed silver blue needles and the wooden cityscape, it was impossible for me to tell what it was like at the center of that circle just by looking at it. Which dovetails into the second change. From that day forward, I was forbidden to go near the circle under any circumstances. In fact, I wasn't allowed to play in the backyard at all anymore, my mom added, sitting across from me at the breakfast table that morning, sporting a pair of black and blue half-crescents under her eyes, revealing that she had barely slept. I protested, but my mom didn't budge an inch. If I so much as stepped foot in the backyard, there would be hell to pay, she said. When I found I wasn't making headway arguing about how unfair that decision was, I pivoted to asking her why I wasn't allowed to go in the backyard anymore, but she wouldn't give me an answer to that question either. So, wrought with grief and livid that I wasn't getting the full story, I told my mom, in no uncertain terms, that I was going to do whatever I wanted and that she couldn't stop me. Slowly, she stood up, head down, her whole body tremoring like an earthquake. Then, she let go. All the feelings my mother was attempting to keep chained to her spine for my benefit broke loose, and I faced a disturbing mix of fear, rage, and misery. Lips trembling, veins bulging, and tears streaming. Another holy trinity of despair. Honestly, it terrified me. Scared me more than the realization that anyone could die at any time, something that came hand in hand with Eli's passing. I didn't argue after that. I was much too afraid of witnessing that jumbled wreck of an emotion spilling from my mum again to protest. So, the circle of birdhouses remained unexplored, Antonio's actions there remaining unseen, unquestioned. Until last night. Now, I know everything. And this post is my confession. Antonio's episodes intensified after that. Before Eli died, they'd occur about once a year. Now, they were happening every other week. Mom or I would find him running around the house in a blind panic, face contorted into an expression of mind-shattering fear, unsure of who he was or where he was. Unsure of everything, honestly, save one thing that he was damn sure about. "I want to get out of here," he'd whisper, mumble, shout, or scream. Every episode was a little bit different in terms of his mannerisms or his temperament, but the tagline remained the same. It wasn't senility. Antonio was 87 years old when Eli died, so chalking his increasingly frequent outbursts up to the price of aging was my mum's favorite excuse. On the surface, it may have seemed like a reasonable explanation, but if senility was the cause, why was he so normal between episodes? He could still safely drive a car, assist me with math homework, and navigate a grocery store. His brain seemed intact. Outside the hour or two, he spent raving like a madman every so often. The same could be said for his body. He was remarkably spry for an octogenarian. Week after week, his episodes kept coming, banging on the walls of our house, reaching for a doorknob that wasn't there, eyes rolled back inside his skull, shaking me awake at 3 in the morning, begging for me to help him get out of here. Notably, Antonio's sessions started around the same time. Every few days, Eli's parents would again arrive at our door. The knocking wouldn't be as frantic, and the soundtrack of death would be quieter, but I could still see the misery buried under their faces. They exuded grief, puffs of it jetting out of them with every step they took, like a balloon with a small hole in the process of deflating. But there was something else there, too. A new emotion my 12-year-old brain had a difficult time putting a name to. It was like hope without the brightness. Big, colorless smiles. Wide, empty eyes. Seeing their uncanny expressions bothered the hell out of me, so as much as I wanted to know what they were doing with Antonio in the basement for hours on end, I stayed clear. Just accepted the phenomenon without questioning it. If my mum's reaction to those birdhouses taught me anything, it's that there are certain things you're better off not knowing. Fast forward a few years, Antonio was having sessions daily, sometimes multiple times a day, each with different people. Whatever he had been doing in the basement with Eli's parents, these new people had come to want that same service. There was only one common thread shared by all of Antonio's guests, too. Someone they loved had died sometime after the circle of birdhouses in our backyard appeared. As his sessions increased, our lives began improving. Mom bought a car out of the blue, a luxury we had to sell to help pay for Dad's funeral when I was much younger. There were talks of me attending to college. I received more than one present under the Christmas tree, and I was allowed to go wherever I wanted for dinner on my birthday. Cost be damned. Meanwhile, Antonio's episodes continued to become more frequent and unpredictable. It got so bad that Mom had to lock his bedroom door from the outside at night. She told me it was for his protection, as well as ours. Ultimately, I found myself shamefully relieved by the intervention. We were safer with Antonio confined to his room while we slept, but that didn't mean we were shielded from the hellish clamor that came with his episodes, unfortunately. Like I said, the walls were thin. One night, when I couldn't sleep, I snuck downstairs, looking to pop my head out the front door and get some fresh air. The inside of our house had a tendency to wick up moisture and hold on to it for dear life, which made the entire place feel like a greenhouse during the summer. Crisp night air had always been the antidote, but sometimes the window in my bedroom wasn't enough. When that was the case, I'd spend a few minutes outside. For most of my childhood, that wasn't an issue. Once we started locking Grandpa in his room while we slept, however, I was no longer allowed downstairs at night, so I needed to sneak around. When I passed Antonio's room that night, I stopped dead in my tracks. My head swiveled around its axis, now on high alert, scanning the darkness. Why are they called birdhouses if the birds don't actually live there, Abuelito? I asked, sitting on the back porch one evening with Antonio, 3 years before Eli's death. He smiled, put a weathered copy of Flowers for Algernon down on his lap, and thought for a moment. When he didn't immediately turn towards me to speak, I watched his brown eyes follow the path of a robin. The bird was drifting cautiously around a birdhouse that looked like a miniature, floating gazebo. He enjoyed observing them. Although Antonio was kind and easy to be around, he always seemed tense, stressed by God knows what. Watching the birds appeared to quiet his mind. Eventually, the robin landed on one of the cream-colored railings and started nipping at the birdseed piled inside the structure. While he bought most of his birdhouses from antique shops and various craftspeople, he'd constructed the gazebo himself, a labor of love. Patiently, I waited for him to respond. I was used to the delay. Antonio physically struggled with conversation. It often took him a long time to respond to questions, even simple ones. It appeared like the process of speech required an exceptional amount of focus. When he finally did speak, it was always a bit off-putting too. The volume of voice would waver at random. His sentences lacked rhythm, speeding up and slowing down unnaturally. It was like he couldn't hear what he was saying as he was saying it, so he could not calibrate his speech to fit the situation in real time. Startled by a car horn in the distance, the robin flew away. His smile waned. He did not meet my eyes as he spoke. Nowadays, they're a refuge, a safe place to rest, somewhere protected from bad weather with free bird food, like a hotel, almost, but that wasn't always the case. A long time ago, when life was harder and food was harder to come by, they were made to look like a safe place for the birds to land, even though they weren't. 9-year-old me gulped. The unexpectedly heavy answer sparked fear inside me, and fear always made me feel like my throat was closing up. A preview of what was to come, perhaps, a premonition of sorts. Do you know what the word trap means? I nodded. 3 months ago, I was lying on the living room couch, attempting to get some homework done. Outside, late evening had begun to transition into true night. The sun had almost completely disappeared over the horizon. Darkness flooded through the house, the type of dull, orange-tinted darkness that can descend on a home that relies purely on natural light during the day. When I was a kid, turning a light bulb on before the sun had set was a cardinal sin. The waste of electricity gave my dad palpitations. That said, money wasn't an issue anymore, hadn't been for a long while. I was free to drive up the electricity bill to my heart's content, and no one would have batted an eye. Still, I couldn't stomach the anxiety that came with turning them on early. Old habits die hard, I guess. When I had arrived home from the day's classes at a nearby community college, I was disappointed to find that Mum was still at her cancer doctor appointment, which meant I was alone with Antonio. His room was on the first floor, directly attached to the living room. The door was ajar and unlatched, 3 differently shaped locks dangling off the knob, swinging softly in a row, like empty gallows. Through the open door, down a cramped, narrow hallway, I spied him sitting on the side of his bed, staring at the wall opposite to his room's only window. He didn't greet me as I entered the living room, didn't so much as flinch at the stomping of my boots against the floorboards. That wasn't new. Sighing, I dropped my book on the floor aside the couch and buried my face in my hands. I couldn't concentrate on my assigned reading, futilely rereading the same passage over and over again. My mind kept drifting back to Antonio, that immortal, living statue gawking at nothing only a few feet away from me. It was all so impossibly peculiar. The man cleaned himself, ate food, drank water. According to his doctor, he was remarkably healthy for someone in their mid-90s too. He was on track to make it 100, maybe more. But he didn't talk, not anymore, and he moved only when he absolutely needed to. His sessions with all the grieving townsfolk had long since come to an end because of his mutism. Eli's parents, for whatever it's worth, were the last to go. His strange candlelight vigils from within the circle of birdhouses hadn't ended with the sessions, though. I'd seen another taking place the week prior, as I pulled out of the driveway in my mum's beat-up sedan, on my way to pick up a pack of cigarettes. The thought of him surrounded by his birdhouses in dead of night, doing God knows what, made a shiver gallop over my shoulders. When I pulled my head from my hands, the sun had fully set, and house had darkened further. I couldn't see through the blackness into Antonio's room. I snapped out of my musings and scrambled to flick on a light, gasping with relief when it turned on, and I saw his frame glued to the same part of the bed he had been perched on before, as opposed to gone and crawling through the shadows like a nightmare. I scowled, chastising myself for being such a scaredy cat. With my stomach rumbling, I reached over to unzip my bag, stationed on a nearby ottoman. I pulled a single wrapped cookie from it and took a bite, sliding back into my reclined position, determined to make a dent in my American literature homework. Needed to be halfway done A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley before I went to sleep that night. As I tried to get comfortable, I could tell something was desperately wrong. My throat felt dry and tight, my skin itched, my guts throbbed. The breath in my chest felt coarse, like my lungs were filled to capacity with asphalt pebbles and shards of broken glass. I shot up and grabbed the cookie's packaging. There was no ingredient label on it. My college's annual spring bake sale had been earlier that day, so the treat had probably been individually wrapped by whoever prepared it. I was told the cookie contained chocolate chips and nothing else. I specifically asked if there were tree nuts in the damn thing, to which the organizer said no. My vision blurred. I began wheezing as I stood up and dumped the contents of my backpack on the ground, searching for my EpiPen. I wobbled, rulers and pencils and textbooks raining around my feet. Despite being deathly allergic to pecans, I had only experienced one true episode of anaphylaxis prior to that night. The experience was much worse than I remembered. Felt like my entire body was drying out, desiccating from a grape to a raisin in the blink of an eye. Before I could locate the life-saving medication, I lost consciousness. I don't believe I fully died, not to the same extent that Antonio had, at least. It's hard to say anything about those moments with certainty, though. The next thing I knew, a tidal wave of oxygen was pouring down my newly expanded throat. I forced my eyes open. Antonio was kneeling over me, silent but eyes wide with concern, holding the used EpiPen in his hand. He helped me up to a sitting position on the couch and handed me my cell phone. I thanked him and dialed 911-1, figuring paramedics should still check me out even if the allergic reaction was dying down. I found it difficult to relay the information to the dispatcher, Not because of my breathing or my throat. I could speak just fine by then. I was distracted. There was a noise that hadn't been there before I passed out. A distant chorus of human voices. They were faint, but I could still appreciate a shared intonation. All of them were shouting. 10, 20, 30 separate voices, each fighting to yell the loudest. And all of them originated from somewhere inside Antonio. Yesterday afternoon at 5:42 p.m., my mother passed away, and I was there with her to the bitter end. Antonio stayed home. The man could have come with me. He wasn't bedbound. He just wouldn't leave, even when I told him what was likely about to happen at the hospice unit. It may seem like I'm glazing over what happened to her, the cancer, the chemotherapy, the radiation, and I don't deny that I am. That particular wound is exquisitely tender, and most of the details are irrelevant to the story. There are only two parts that matter: the terrible things that she disclosed to me on her deathbed, and what happened to her immediately after dying. I raced home, careening over my town's poorly maintained side streets at more than twice the speed limit, my mother's confessions spinning wildly in my head. As I got closer to our neighborhood, I tried to calm myself down. I let my foot ease off the accelerator. She must have been delirious, I thought. Drunk on the liquor of near death, the toxicity of her dying body putting her into a metabolic stupor. I, the hand, must have been made temporarily insane by grief, because I had genuinely believed her outlandish claims. We must have gotten the money from somewhere else. As our house grew on the horizon, however, I saw something that sent me spiraling into a panic once more. A cluster of twinkling yellow-orange dots illuminated my backyard, floating above the ground like some sort of phantasmal bonfire. I didn't even bother to park properly. My car hit the driveway at an odd angle, causing the right front tire to jump the curb with a heavy clunk. The sound and the motion barely even fazed me. My attention squarely fixed on the circle of birdhouses, adorned with burning candles. I stopped the engine with only half of the vehicle in the driveway, stumbling out the driver's side door a second later. In the 3 months that followed my anaphylaxis, I could hear the chorus of shouting voices when Antonio was around, but only when he was very close by. The solution to that existential dilemma was simple: avoid my great-grandfather like the plague. As long as I was more than a few feet away, I couldn't hear them, and if I couldn't hear them, I didn't have to speculate about what they were. Something was different last night, though. I heard the ethereal cacophony the moment I swung open my car door. Dozens of frenzied voices besieged me as I paced into the backyard, shouting over each other, creating an incomprehensible mountain of noise from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It only got louder as I approached the circle. The cacophony didn't dissuade me, though. If anything, the hellish racket inspired me. I felt madness swell behind my eyes as I got closer and closer. Hot blood erupted from my pounding heart and pulsed through my body. I was finally going to see the innards of that goddamned, forbidden circle. I was finally going to know. No more secrets, no more lies. I spied a small area low to the ground where the foliage was thinner and there wasn't a birdhouse blocking the way. I ducked down and slammed my body through the perimeter head first, spruce tree needles scraping against my face as I pushed through. And then, near silence. When my head reached the inside, the voices had disappeared, and the only thing that replaced them was the pulpy sounds of a chewing jaw. Soft, moist grinding of teeth, like a child working through a mouth overfilled with salt water taffy. But there was no child, only Antonio standing with back to me, making those horrific noises. Whatever he was eating it ravenously. It sounded like he barely even paused to swallow after each voracious bite. His arms kept reaching into something suspended in the air by a metal chain that was tethered to the thick branches above us, but I couldn't see what exactly it was with him in the way. The trees that formed the circle had grown around some invisible threshold that divided the center from the world outside, forming a tightly sealed dome. The inside offered no view of the birdhouses and their candles. However, the space was still incredibly bright, almost blindingly so. Not only that, but the brightness looked like candlelight. Flickered like it too, but there wasn't a single candle present on the inside, and I couldn't see out into the rest of the backyard. The dense trees obscured any view of the outside. Wispy smoke filtered in from the dome's roof, through a small opening that the branches seemed to purposefully leave uncovered. falling onto whatever was directly in front of Antonio. I took a hesitant step forward, and the crunch of a leaf under my boot caused the chewing to abruptly end. His head shot up and his neck straightened. The motions were so fluid. They shouldn't have been possible from a man that was nearly a century old. I can't stop replaying the moment he turned in my head. Antonio swung his body to face me, cheeks dappled with some sort of greasy amber, multiple yellow-brown chunks hanging off his skin like jelly. A layer of glistening oil coated the length of his jawline. It gushed from his mouth as well as the amber chunks, forming a necklace of thick, marigold-colored globules dangling off his chin, their strands reaching as low as his collarbone. Some had enough weight to drip off his face, falling into a puddle at his feet. His hands were slick with the same unidentifiable substance. And while he stared at me, stunned, I saw the object he had initially been blocking. An immaculately smooth alabaster birdhouse, triple the size of any other in our backyard, hanging from the metal chain. 2 human pelvic bones flared from its roof like a pair of horns. The bones weren't affixed to the structure via nails or glue. The edges where they connected to the birdhouse looked too smooth, too polished. No, it appeared to me like they had grown from it. A chimney between those horns seemed to funnel the smoke into the box. There was a quarter-sized hole in the front of it, which was still oozing the amber jelly, cascading from the opening like viscous, crystalline sausage links. With Antonio's body out of the way, I heard a disembodied voice. It wasn't shouting like the others. It was whimpering apologetically, its somber melody drifting off the smoke and into my ears. I recognized it. It was Mom's. I took another step forward, overloaded and seething. When I did, Antonio finally spoke. Inside the circle, he didn't have any trouble talking, but his voice seemed to echo, his words quietly mirrored with a slight delay by a dozen other voices. Listen, just listen. I have to keep eating. If I die, then everyone inside me dies too. You wouldn't want that, right? If I decide to stop eating, that's akin to killing them. It's unconscionable. Your mother isn't ready to go either. That's why I'm doing this. I know she told you the truth. I know you can hear them now too. That's okay. I can teach you how to cope with it. We can all still be together. As long as I keep eating, I'll never die, which means no one else will either. I've seen the next place. The black ether. This is better. Trust me. My breathing became ragged. I took another step. Don't look at me like that. This isn't my fault. I figured out how to do it, sure, but it wasn't my idea. Your mother told me it would be a one-time thing. Save Eli and keep him here, for him and his parents' sake. Right, what's wrong, Antonio? She said. Make life a little more fair, they pleaded. But people talk, and once it got out that I could prevent a person from passing on by eating them, then half the town wanted in on it. Everyone wanted to spend extra time with their dearly departed. I was just the vessel to that end. All the while, the smoke, my mother's supposed soul, continued to billow into the birdhouse. What came out was her essence made tangible, a material that had been processed and converted into something Antonio could consume. Don't forget, you benefited from this too. It was your mother's idea to make a profit off of it. She phrased it as paying tribute, not compensation, not a service fee. But we all knew what it was. Financial incentive for us to continue defying death. You liked those Christmas presents? Yes? You're enjoying college? What do you think paid for it? Who do you think made the required sacrifices? The voices under his seemed to become more agitated, in synchrony with Antonio himself. I've lost count of how many I have inside me. It's so goddamned loud. This sanctuary is the only place I can't hear them, swirling and churning and pleading in my gut. I used to be able to pull one to surface and let them take the wheel for a while. Let them spend time with the still living through me. But now, it's too chaotic, too cramped. I'm too full, and there's nowhere for them to go, so they've all melded together. When I try to pull someone specific up, I can't tell who they even are, or if I'm pulling up half a person or 3. They all look the same, moldy amalgamations mindlessly begging to be brought to the surface. But I'm saving them from something worse. The birdhouses, the conclave, it guides them here. I light the candles, and they know to come. I house them, protect them from drifting off to the ether. And as long as I keep eating, I'll never die, which means they get to stay as well. You wouldn't ask me to kill them, would you? You wouldn't damn them to the ether. I can still feel him, you know. Eli, he's still here. I'm sorry that you never got to experience him through me. Your mother strictly forbade it, called the whole practice unnatural, while hypocritically reaping the benefits of it. I would bring him up now, but I haven't been able to reach him for the last few years. He's too far buried. But in a sense, he still gets to live, even if he can't surface like he used to. Surely you wouldn't ask me to stop eating then? You wouldn't ask me to kill Eli? I know he wouldn't want to die. I know him better than you ever did now. I lunged at Antonio, tackled him to the ground aside the alabaster birdhouse. I screamed at him, no words, just a guttural noise, a sonic distillation of my fear and agony. Before long, I had my hands around his throat, squeezing. He tried to pull me off, but it was no use. His punches had no force, and there was no way he could pry my grip off his windpipe. Even if the so-called eating had prolonged his life, plateaued his natural decay, it hadn't reversed his aging. Antonio still had the frail body of 80-something-year-old, no matter how many souls he siphoned from the atmosphere, luring them into this trap before they could transition to the next life. His face turned red, then purple-blue, and then it blurred out completely. It was like hundreds of faces superimposed over each other. The end result was an unintelligible wash of skin and movement. The sight made me devastatingly nauseous, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. The punches slowed. Eventually, they stopped completely. My scream withered into a low, continuous grumble. I blinked. In the time it took for me to close and reopen my eyes, the candle-lit dome and the alabaster birdhouse had vanished. Then, it was just me, straddling Antonio's lifeless body in our backyard, a starless night draped over our heads. All of his other birdhouses still hung on the nearby spruce trees, but each and every candle had gone out. I thought I heard a whisper, scarcely audible. It sounded like Mom. I couldn't tell what she said, if it really was her. And then, silence. For the first time in a long while, the space around me felt empty. I was truly alone. Now, I think I can leave. I know I need to move on. Start fresh somewhere else and try again. But, in order to do that, I feel like I have to leave these experiences behind, as much as I can, anyway. Confession feels like a good place to begin that process, but I have no one to confess to. I wiped out the last of our family by killing Antonio. So, this post will have to be enough. I'm not naive. I know these traumatic memories won't slough off me like snakeskin just because I've put them into words, but ceremony is important. When someone dies, we hold a funeral in their honor, and then we bury them. No one expects the grief to disappear just because their body is 6 feet under, and yet, we still do it. We maintain the tradition. This is no different. My mother's cremated remains will be ready soon. Once I have them, I'll scatter them over Antonio's grave, the one I dug last night, in the center of the circle of birdhouses still hanging in our backyard. This is a eulogy as much as it is confession, I suppose. My loved ones weren't evil. Antonio just wanted to help the community. My mother just wanted to give me a better life. Their true sin was delving into something they couldn't possibly understand, believing they could control it safely, twist it to their own means. Antonio, of all people, should have understood that death is sacred. It's not fair, but it is universal, and there's a small shred of justice in that fact worthy of our respect. I hope Antonio and my mother are resting peacefully. I haven't forgiven them yet. Someday I will, but today is not that day. I'm so sorry, Eli. I promise I didn't know. All that said, I can't help but feel like I'll never truly rid myself of my great-grandfather's curse. As Antonio consumed more, he seemed to have more difficulty speaking. The people accumulating inside him were too loud. I've assumed that he couldn't hear them until after he started eating. Remember my recollection of Antonio explaining the origin of birdhouses? That happened 3 years before Eli's death, and at that time, he had the same difficulty speaking. It was much more manageable, yes, but it was there. That means he heard voices of the dead his entire life, even if he never explicitly said so, from his near-death experience onward. I'm mentioning this because I can still hear something too. I think I can, at least. Antonio's dead. But maybe his connection to the ether didn't just close when he took his last breath. Maybe it got passed on. Maybe death hovers over me like a carrion bird now. Or maybe, hopefully, I'm just hearing things that aren't really there,